He stole my underwear every time he was in my room, and I started to notice it. I didn't say anything at first, not even to myself. Some things you don't let reach the surface all at once. They come up like steam, slowly, invisibly, until the mirror fogs and you can't see yourself clearly anymore. It started with a missing pair, then a pair that had been folded too carefully. A drawer left half open when I knew I'd closed it. The scent of something, not mine. Subtle, clean, masculine. I don't know what disturbed me more, the violation or the heat that flickered beneath it. Because it wasn't fear I felt. It was awareness. My name is Elaine. I'm 46. I've been married to Jacob for 18 years. We share a mortgage, a quiet kitchen, 2 coffee mugs that never sit in the dishwasher at the same time. Our marriage is not broken. It's organized, functional, predictable. A shared life built on habits that look like love when you squint hard enough. Lately, our conversations are calendars. Did you call the plumber? Did you RSVP to your sister's thing? Don't forget the electric bill. We live like coworkers who used to date. There are no fights, no bruises, just a silence that's too well-fed to be accidental. I've learned how to fill it with polite sounds. The clink of dishes, the low hum of the laundry machine, the fake laugh I use when he tells a story I've heard 5 times. He always sounds tired. I probably do too. I forget sometimes what my real voice sounds like. Aaron came to live with us in January. He's the son of an old friend, Liz, who I've known since my 20s, when we still called cheap wine romantic and stayed up until 3 a.m. like we were immune to the future. Aaron's 28. Polite, clean, beautiful in the way only people who haven't started shrinking yet can be. All bone and intention. He was between jobs, Liz said. Needed a place for a couple weeks. We had a guest house behind the garage. Jacob didn't even blink. Of course, he said. 2 weeks, no problem. That was 4 months ago. Aaron's quiet. Not withdrawn, just deliberate. He wakes early. Runs. Showers before sunrise. Leaves the bathroom cleaner than I do. He helps without being asked. Lifts the heavy grocery bags. Offers to patch the rotting edge of the deck. Cleans out the gutters when Jacob forgets. Which is often. He always says, no rush, when I say dinner's running late. Always waits until I've poured my tea before he reaches for the sugar. Always careful. Too careful, maybe? I caught him watching me 2 weeks ago. It was laundry day. The sun was low and I'd left the basket outside while I stepped in to grab the detergent. I bent to lift it awkwardly with both arms, and when I looked up, he was there. Standing at the edge of the patio window. Not hiding, not approaching, just standing. His face didn't change when I met his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. And neither did I. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Seconds, maybe less. But it was enough for something buried, something fossilized by years of routine and unspoken resentment, to blink inside me. I didn't say a word when I passed him later that day. Neither did he. But I felt it, like static between us. And I knew he had too. I tried to laugh it off. He's 28, Elaine. You're a married woman. But facts don't stop chemistry. They only hide it behind guilt until it starts to rot. I started noticing more after that. The way his footsteps shifted when he walked past our bedroom. The way his fingers brushed the counter when I was close, then quickly retracted like he'd reached too far without meaning to. Or the way his voice dropped just slightly when he asked if I needed help with anything. Anything at all. He never said anything inappropriate, never stared, never asked a question I couldn't answer. But the air between us changed. It became elastic. I found myself checking my reflection before going into the kitchen, wearing mascara just because. shaving my legs on a Wednesday afternoon when no one would see them. Except someone might. Jacob didn't notice. He was working late again. Budget meetings. Team reviews. I made dinner alone. Ate half. Put the rest in Tupperware. When he came home, I asked about his day. He said, long. I asked about the project. He said, same. He kissed my cheek while scrolling through his phone. I smiled, because that's what you do when nothing's wrong. That night, I walked past the guest house before bed. The lights were off, but his car was still parked behind the oak tree. I stood there for a second too long. The air smelled like cut grass and the first slip of spring. I wondered if he was awake. If he was lying there, eyes open, thinking about nothing. Or about me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt like a question. The next morning, I opened my underwear drawer and something was different. One of the silk ones, not even the prettiest, had been folded too neatly. I hadn't worn it in weeks. I reached for it. Held it. Nothing was missing. Nothing was ruined. But I knew. And I knew he knew I knew. I didn't say anything, not even to myself. I just stood there, then closed the drawer. Gently, like the silence inside it might shatter if I made a sound. Jacob left for his conference on a Wednesday morning. The sky was flat gray, the kind that makes the world look like it forgot to wake up. He packed quickly, methodically, the way men who don't linger anymore do. The same brown leather bag he's used for a decade, scuffed at the corners, but still intact. A sad metaphor if you think about it too hard. He laid each item out with mechanical precision. 4 shirts, 2 slacks, a tie he wouldn't wear, deodorant. A small bottle of travel cologne that once reminded me of late dinners and early flights, but now just smelled like obligation. I stood by the closet, pretending to smooth the bedspread. I don't know why. We were past the part where help was wanted. Just Wednesday to Saturday, he said without looking at me. Same hotel as last year. Right, I replied. He turned to zip the bag, then hesitated. You'll be okay? As though the question hadn't arrived a year too late. I always am, I said, forcing a smile. He kissed my temple, light, obligatory, the way you kiss someone who's become a ritual. Then the front door clicked closed. The sound echoed longer than it should have. I didn't tell Aaron that Jacob was leaving. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I didn't want to explain why the truth mattered. I assumed he'd figure it out. The driveway was empty. The house was quiet. The only coffee mug in the sink was mine. Some truths don't need to be said. They just hang in the air, waiting to be inhaled. He came to the back door that evening, around 7:30, just as the light was draining from the trees. I hadn't cooked. I hadn't eaten. I'd been pacing in and out of the kitchen for an hour, pretending to care about laundry, wiping already clean counters. When the knock came, it startled me more than it should have. I opened the door and there he was, tray in hand, sleeves rolled, hair still slightly damp like he'd just showered but hadn't used a mirror. Tea. 2 mugs. Lemon slices on a folded napkin. I made too much, he said. The lie sat so softly between us, neither of us bothered to call it what it was. I stepped aside. Come in. The kitchen light was soft, one dim pendant over the island. It cast gentle shadows, enough to make everything look slightly more forgiving. He set the tray down and poured without asking. I watched the steam rise from the mugs, grateful for something to look at. He leaned against the island. Casual. Relaxed in a way that made me nervous. I realized, then, that I'd changed shirts twice before he arrived. And that I'd reapplied my lipstick, even though it was just tea. We talked about books at first. He'd found an old copy of The Bell Jar in the guest house. We joked about how depressing it was. I told him I read it in college. that I never really liked it. Then why do you still have it? I shrugged. Maybe because I liked who I was when I read it. He didn't laugh at that. He just nodded, eyes on mine like he understood more than he should. There were pauses. So many pauses. But they didn't feel like silence. They felt like listening. He didn't lean in, didn't flirt. But the distance between our shoulders was smaller than it had any right to be. At one point, our elbows brushed. Just slightly. Neither of us moved. He asked me if I ever wrote anything. I told him I used to. Short stories. Nothing big. Why'd you stop? I didn't know how to answer that. Because Jacob never read them? Because the kids needed dinner and then college funds and then I forgot I was allowed to create something just because? Because there was no room for wonder in a house full of duty? Instead, I said, I just got busy. He studied me, not judging. But his silence asked a question my body didn't want to answer. I laughed too often that night. Not because anything was funny, but because I couldn't remember the last time I felt watched. Not in a way that made me shrink. In a way that made me visible. He laughed too, once, when I spilled a little tea on my shirt. He reached for a napkin and dabbed the spot gently. Not touching skin. Just cloth. But it was too much. Or not enough. Something in me pulled taut. When he stood to leave, he carried his mug with him. Thanks for letting me crash the kitchen, he said, smiling. You brought the tea, I replied. Yeah, but you made the space. His eyes stayed on mine for 1 second too long. I didn't look away. And when he turned to go, he hesitated at the door, hand on the knob, body turned slightly back. If he had said anything in that moment, I might have fallen. But he didn't. And I was both grateful and disappointed. After he left, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, heart pounding, hands cold. I whispered aloud, "Stop this." To the air. To myself. To the part of me that had started to hum. But nothing had started. Not really. No lines had been crossed. No vows broken. And yet, something had already slipped. A single breath into a locked room. I didn't sleep that night. Not from guilt. From awareness. I lay in bed with the window cracked just slightly, letting in a breeze I told myself was for air. But really, I wanted to hear his footsteps if they came. They didn't. But I stayed awake anyway. The next morning, the drawer was exactly how I'd left it. But when I opened it, I still stared. Not because anything was wrong. Because I couldn't stop imagining hands that had held things gently. As if they meant something. I went about my morning as usual. Coffee, dishwasher, watered the plants. But every moment felt off-key, like a song I knew too well had suddenly changed chords. I told myself it was just attention. That I'd gone too long without being seen. That my marriage, this quiet, dutiful thing, had trained me to be grateful for crumbs. And maybe that was true. But it didn't explain the warmth that stayed in my chest when I remembered the napkin he folded without looking. Or the way he said you made the space like it meant more than it did. Or the flicker in his eyes that I recognized only because I'd once had it too. By afternoon, I found myself looking out the kitchen window. Just once. Just long enough to check. His car was parked. Lights off. I didn't go to the guest house. Didn't text. Didn't invent a reason. But I stood there for longer than I should have. Feeling the weight of a moment that hadn't happened. And wondering if that was worse than if it had. That night, I made dinner for one. I used the good dishes. Lit a single candle. I don't know who I was trying to feed. My hunger or my illusion of control. I told myself nothing had changed. But I wore mascara to take out the trash. And that felt like an answer. It wasn't missing. That was the thing. If it had been missing, I could have pretended I misremembered, told myself I'd done laundry and forgot to put it back. that it was buried beneath sweaters or slipped behind the drawer wall. But it wasn't gone. It was folded. Carefully. Too carefully. Not the way I fold. Not the quick, habitual pinch of cotton into a stack. Not the one-handed shove to make space. This was deliberate. The kind of fold that means, I held this. I stood there for a long time. Looking. Not touching. Not thinking, even. Because thought would come later. This was just awareness. And something else. Something warmer. Lower. I don't have a name for it. Not exactly. It wasn't fear. It wasn't disgust. It wasn't even violation. It was heat. A slow, coiled kind of heat. The kind that blooms in places no one's touched in a long time. The kind that doesn't ask for permission because it isn't asking for anything. It's simply arriving. I didn't check the rest of the drawer. I didn't want to know if other things had been moved. I just closed it. Too gently. As if it might break. As if I might. There was a knock at the front door. Sharp. Familiar. I straightened automatically. Smoothed my sleeves. Wiped my palms against my thighs even though I wasn't sweating, not visibly. I knew before I opened it who it was. Aaron. Holding a paper grocery bag against his chest like it belonged to someone else. He smiled. Ran into some end-of-day produce deals, he said. Thought you might want lemons. He didn't mention the drawer. Of course he didn't. But I looked at him like I was seeing him for the first time, and he looked back like he had been waiting to be seen. That pause, it wasn't long. But it was long enough. Long enough for both of us to say everything without saying a word. I stepped aside. Let him in. We didn't talk much. We rarely did. But the silences were changing shape. They used to be clean. Functional. Now they were thick. Private. I poured tea. He unpacked the bag. Lemons. A jar of honey. A sprig of something green the first didn't ask about. He moved through the kitchen like he lived there. Like he had been inside the space longer than I'd noticed. When he left, he didn't touch me. But his sleeve brushed my wrist as he passed, and I froze not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want it to end. And when the door closed, I felt colder than the weather had any right to explain. I didn't tell Jacob about any of it. He called that night from his hotel. Asked if the car was running okay. Said the Wi-Fi was garbage. Mentioned how funny it was that hotel pillows never feel right, like they know you're pretending to sleep. I laughed. Said I missed him. I don't know why I said it. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't true either. What I missed was a version of him from before. Before the silence became something we decorated with effort. Before our marriage turned into a museum. Beautiful, quiet, untouchable. That night, I opened the drawer again. Same piece. Same fold. I touched it this time. Just the edge. I thought I might cry. But I didn't. I only felt warm. And that terrified me more than tears ever could. The next day, I wore perfume. Not a lot. Just one drop behind the ear. No plans. No visitors. But I wore it anyway. Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be wanted. Even if it was only by the air. The week moved slowly. I found myself rearranging things, placing fresh towels on the bed, organizing the medicine drawer, wiping the baseboards. Busy hands. Still mind. Not really thinking. But not escaping either. Aaron didn't knock again that week. But I heard him. His footsteps on the gravel. The creak of the guest house porch when he leaned against the rail. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't avoiding. He was waiting. On Thursday, I opened the washing machine and found one of my nightgowns. Washed. Dried. Folded. I hadn't done laundry. I hadn't asked anyone to. I held it like a question. Brought it to my face. Smelled nothing unusual. But I knew. I sat down in the hallway, knees to chest, back to the wall, and stayed there for 10 minutes. Not crying, just thinking. Thinking about how we talk about boundaries like they're fences. But sometimes they're just shadows. And if someone steps close enough, you can't see them clearly anymore. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to ask, why? But I didn't, because I already knew. Because the why didn't matter. The knowing did. Jacob came back on Saturday. Tired. Hungry. Already talking about work. He kissed me on the cheek and asked if the hot water had held up. I said yes. He unpacked. I stood in the doorway, watching him put his toothbrush back on the shelf beside mine. And I felt like a guest in my own house. That night, when I slid into bed beside him, he reached for my hand. I let him take it. His fingers were warm, familiar. But I stared at the ceiling and thought, you never notice what's moved. It rained the night before. A soft, constant rain, the kind that coats the windows in gray and makes the world feel wrapped in gauze. Jacob was already gone for work. I watched his taillights blink away through the condensation. It was early. Too early to be awake for no reason, too late to call it insomnia. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, wrapped in a robe I hadn't worn in years. It was warm, thick, old, but soft at the collar, with that faint scent of cedar from the back of the closet. I told myself it was just for comfort. But that wasn't true. There are garments that aren't clothing. They're decisions. At 8:04, there was a knock at the door. 3 taps. Light. Familiar. I opened it without asking who it was. Of course it was him. Aaron stood in the gray morning light, hair damp, sleeves pushed back. He held a jar in both hands. Jam, he said. I made too much. Always too much. Always pretending it was an accident. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at him. His fingers were pink from the cold. His breath visible in small clouds. I reached for the jar. And his hand stayed. Fingers wrapped around glass. Mine wrapped around his. We both held it. At the same time. And neither of us let go. Not immediately. Not instinctively. The air between us didn't shift. It thickened. His hand was warm. His gaze didn't move. And that touch, just skin on skin, felt louder than anything I had heard in years. There was no urgency. No surprise. Just knowing. He let go first. Gently. Respectfully. As if he understood that the pull had already happened and anything else would be too much. I stepped back. He didn't follow. Thank you, I said, voice too quiet. He nodded once. You're welcome. And then he left. No questions. No pretense. No apology. Just the truth. Left standing in the doorway. I closed the door and leaned against it. The jar still in my hands, my palms still tingling. That morning, I stood at the sink and stared out at the wet grass. The window blurred with fog. Inside me, everything sharp. The robe clung to my back, damp with the heat of breath I hadn't noticed. I thought I might cry, but I didn't. I only trembled, because I knew something had shifted, not between us, but inside me. And it couldn't be reversed. I hadn't kissed him, hadn't touched more than his hand, hadn't whispered anything secret, and yet I felt completely undone. Not like a betrayal, like a return. To myself. To a body that had been ignored by me for so long it forgot how to answer. To a voice that had gone hoarse from waiting to be heard. That afternoon, I changed the sheets. I scrubbed the stovetop. I mopped the floors. Not to cleanse anything, but to notice things. I wasn't moving in shame. I was moving in awareness. Jacob came home early. He brought flowers, the kind I used to buy myself. He smiled when I opened the door. Tulips, he said. You like tulips, right? I nodded. I do. He kissed my forehead. Thought of you when I passed the stand. He didn't ask about the robe, still drying on the bathroom door. He didn't notice the jam in the fridge. He didn't sense the storm that had already passed through the house. And I didn't offer it. That night, I watched him sleep. The way his chest rose. The way his mouth twitched with dreams he never told me about. I reached for his hand in the dark. Held it. Not because I wanted to lie. Because I wanted to feel the weight of what still belonged to me. Even if I was already drifting beyond it. In the morning, I wrote a list on the notepad by the fridge. Grocery store. Dry cleaning. Call mom. At the bottom, I wrote, remember. Just that. No object. No explanation. Just the word. Because I didn't want to forget. Not the robe. Not the hand. Not the trembling that felt like waking up. I was still married. But not that morning. And some mornings, even now, I still live in that silence. Where nothing happened. And yet, everything did.